won prizes internationally. It's also quite a light beer at 3.8% alcohol by volume. And we are delighted to have them on board as a sponsor. And so they managed to get you to wear a cap.
Can you believe it? Can you believe it? Against my better sense, but, as they say, Fadzamtengi. Exactly. This is precisely what they meant. But I'm not going to have Pilsner. Before I tell you what I'm actually having, I must say they've actually improved the set and the bar.
Yes, we've got these fantastic bar mats, which hopefully will become a permanent feature of the set.
Okay, so we can actually keep these.
I don't know. The producer will advise. He's the guy who does all these deals. We're the talent. We just come up here and perform, right?
And we have a fashionable version, Gen Z, and
lots of colorful,
very colorful
bottles.
Would you like to just tell us a little bit more about what exactly you're drinking?
Is going on over there?
Yeah.
Okay, so I am having a rose geranium spritz. So traditionally it's served with Prosecco, which we have over here. Sometimes it's served as a gin and tonic. I have it currently with some tonic in it. So rose geranium is quite a popular combination here in Zim, so that's why I chose it.
And yet I've never heard of it, so we're clearly not in the same generation.
Maybe, or evidently.
Yeah, evidently. Yeah. And is this your drink of choice on a Friday weekend or when?
I prefer a sangria.
Right.
A sangria, that's my favorite. Yeah.
That's basically like some red wine mixed with what are the other ingredients?
Fruit. Mainly red wine with fruit.
I think George once made a sangria on the show some time back. Yeah, I don't see a lot of those out there.
Yeah, it could be hit or miss, but I do like.
That's your drink of choice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, you've made the set very colorful and our bar a lot more interesting. Please let us know what you think, and would you have something like this, or would you have my good old Coca-Cola?
What do they mean when they say less sugar? I mean,
they mean precisely that it used to be 20 tablespoons, and now it's 18 tablespoons. So
yeah, that is
less sugar. That is less sugar.
So that's different from Coke Zero, which has got no sugar. It's just got artificial sugar, basically.
Insisted that you were not going to buy a Coke Zero, so you're the producer.
You see, the non-drinkers on this show are not organized about what they're drinking. See, we take our beverages on this end of the table quite seriously. With Tinashe and Ranga, it's a last-minute mess all the time. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to answer the question that you didn't ask me about May Day.
Yes.
Which is, it's really it's a communist holiday.
It's a Fabian socialist holiday, not the communist, but the Fabian, and the Western side.
We really should stop celebrating it, in my opinion, because we don't aspire to socialist or communist ideals. Communism failed; it's responsible for the unnecessary deaths of more than 100 million people.
Okay,
and we should move on and just embrace free market capitalism.
Okay. Wow. I think I just want to push back on that, because I think. Facts are very important, so we need to emphasize on the facts. It's a social democrat. It's not necessarily communist, although they're of similar hue. But these are workers, labor, and it's more your Western type Fabian socialists who are not necessarily Marxist. There is a very good distinction there. Otherwise, they will fight. If you call them the same, they will punch you in the face. They are not the same. So I think this is in recognition of the workers. And I think that it's an important day. I think whether or not we believe in it, it does not necessarily mean you don't celebrate it. And there are lots of people who on Christmas Day celebrate Christmas Day, but just the spirit of Christmas Day, but do not believe in Christmas. Similarly, I think we celebrate Valentine's Day, and we don't necessarily believe in Valentine's. Yeah, go ahead.
So I do think, Rufaro, that your point is very interesting. I like how polarizing your opinions tend to be. I think I watched your Easter episode and I saw the discourse. And you guys were
they were
evangelizing, right? And then you were like, so the pagans. And I was like, oh, diversity, So yeah, I do tend to like that aspect of the show.
And where do you sit on the spectrum of socialism and capitalism?
I tend to, go the capitalist route personally. Yeah. I know I do like this holiday, but yes, I do tend to be more capitalistic in nature.
Well, cheers to that.
Cheers to that. Yeah.
Chin chin, chin chin. Sante, sante.
And cheers to everybody that's actually watching the show. So maybe, by way of introduction, maybe you can just introduce yourself to our viewers, and then we can then get into the weeds.
Okay, so I am Rutendo Jambwa, and I am an economic analyst, as well as an investment analyst. I say economic analyst because I'm still new to the game, right? If I call myself an economist, that's a bit heavy, that either means I already have a postgraduate degree in economics, or I have many years.
Tinashe identifies as an economist,
Really?
but he doesn't have any postgraduate economist qualification.
But there's the other aspect, right, where I say it's either you have a graduate degree in it or you have many years of experience in the field. That's how I feel I would qualify as an economist. But right now I'll stick to economic analyst.
Okay.
And then I am a lover of financial content, just like your channel over here. I was just telling you early on that my family really loves your show. So when you call me...
When you say family, you mean your dad?
They're not, but no, like
Can we curb the misogyny, please?
So it's mainly my siblings, right? My
right.
older sibling, my twin brother, yeah. So they like that show, and they introduced me to this show.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
No, I'm quite chuffed that Gen Z actually watched the show.
Oh, yeah.
And are interested in the...
Okay, for my purposes and the audiences, what Gen Z is people born between which years? Because I'm not very familiar with these.
Isn't it 97 to 2012? Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So yeah, 27 to about 12 years old. Yeah. 12 years old. Yeah.
That's Gen Z. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Oh, fantastic. So, and tell us a little bit more about your work experience in South Africa, because that's really where we want to start.
Okay. So I worked at a couple of places. I worked at a credit ratings agency as an associate analyst for fund ratings, fixed income, money market type fund ratings. Then I worked at a credit ratings consultancy, mainly dealing with sovereign ratings. So yeah, that's where I worked.
So you're the people who are responsible for Zimbabwe having a junk credit rating.
Well,
Zim is actually unrated.
It's unrated.
So it's actually worse than junk.
No,
it's unrated. It's unrated.
We'll get into it. We'll get into those weeds.
Yeah.
But we want to start there. Mm-hmm. So can you please just tell us a little bit about the methodology that's actually used in rating countries?
Okay, so as we know, or as some people in the audience may know, there are 3 major credit rating agencies in the world. So that is Fitch, Standard & Poor, and Moody's. Generally, obviously, each of them have individual methodologies, more specific ones to each one, but generally, they cover 5 areas. So you have your economic assessment, you have your institutional assessment, you have a fiscal assessment, you have a monetary assessment, and you have a foreign assessment. Yes, an external assessment. So obviously, fiscal, you're looking at government expenditure, government debt, etc. Monetary assessment, you're looking at things such as interest rates, inflation, or price stability. Then foreign assessment, you're looking at FDI, the current account balance. What was the other one? Institutional, you're looking at the institutions, the governance of a country, as well as the social structure. I think there's one that I missed out on. But yeah, that's generally the 5 pillars that they look at.
And who came up with these?
Goodness me, I wish I knew myself.
The audience wants to actually understand that, this is how you actually break it down, and how do they arrive at these 5 components of credit rating.
Yeah, I would not be so sure myself, but I do think that all 3 of them tend to have the same 5 components to them. Yeah.
And what do you think about those 3 agencies? Because their reputation maybe 20, 30 years ago was impeccable, and then, they made all these calls, I think, Standard & Poor was the first one to actually downgrade the US from AAA to AAA minus.
Oh, double A.
Or double
A plus.
Double A plus.
Yeah.
And yet the US dollar index has continued to power on. The US dollar is continues to be the world's reserve currency. And so many people have been critical of the ratings agency. So I think the US dollar credit rating was the last major controversy. The one before that, which I think is even more important, is during the global financial crisis, 2008, 2009.
Yes,
they stamped all these subprime mortgage securities as AAA, and they turned out not to be worth the pieces of paper they were, written on. So how seriously should we take Fitch, Moody's, and S&P?
Okay, so I think The Big Short even covered that 2008
Yeah, it was a fantastic book and movie.
Yes, definitely. So should we trust credit rating agencies? I do believe so, because since the 2008 crisis, there have been many reforms. I think Dodd-Frank, is that the act that was enacted? So the Dodd-Frank Act, dealt with certain issues such as those. And I think that since then, credit rating agencies have mitigated certain risks in terms of rating, let's say, subprime mortgages, and they're more robust in terms of how they tackle certain issues because they are wary of their reputations. Now, it could be argued that after the 2008 crisis, they may have overcompensated by giving certain countries, let's say at the sovereign level, harsher ratings than they should have, let's say in the 2010-11 era. But I think since then they've eased up, and in terms of guarding their reputations, and they've made their systems more robust in terms of addressing biases of sorts. Yeah.
Okay, so when you think about it, then I love that Rufaro has brought the financial crisis, and every rating agent gave a AAA.
Yeah.
Was there collusion, or why would they have the same outcome? These are supposed to be three different rating agencies, but how come the outcome was exactly the same? So when they get it wrong, they all get it wrong. When they get it right, they all get it right. Oh, is that so?
I would say that, I'm not necessarily sure. I can't speak to what happened behind closed doors. Hey, I was probably 8 or 9 during that time, so
we're more interested in your opinion.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I do think that prior to after 2008, there's been a separation between the commercial and the rating side, right? So that companies become more independent in terms of their assessment of whatever it is, corporate or sovereign or etc. So since the separation happened after the fact, it could have been the case that there was a lot of information sharing and all. So
it's a politically correct way of saying it.
Yeah,
well, I'll take it.
Yeah, so that's how I would.
But it just gives us the limitations and the advantages. Maybe we can get into that. So especially with emerging market countries, what are the advantages of being rated?
So by being rated, I think that it's just like any human being. Let's take it to the human being. I know we'll get to this point because hates them, but let's say any human being who wants to get access to a loan, right? They ask themselves, okay, how will I get access to a loan? And in a functional setup, they would say, okay, but I need to have a good credit score, or I need someone to even assess my behavior, be it my earnings, be it my character, so that I can gain access to capital, be it for a business or etc. So that's the main advantage at the country level, at the country level, they say, oh, we need access to capital, so we need someone to give us a rating or
they call it synthetic collateral.
Yeah.
Right, because usually, and typically in Zimbabwe, when people lend, they lend against a hard asset.
Yeah.
But there's also lending against a credit history.
Yeah.
And that we call it a synthetic collateral. And I think that that's a very important point that you actually bring out, that countries forget this, that actually your record, if you have an impeccable record of paying back your creditors, then you have something called synthetic collateral that you can use and trade in the financial markets. So that's a very important.
So this so that made a question percolate in my mind when you had the segue to say, I know for a fact that in South Africa right now, they have this national database where if you have the new ID, you just walk into a bank and you present your ID, and within 5 minutes, the bank can offer you a credit card, a personal loan, a car loan, a mortgage, because your entire financial and credit history is accessible to all the banks on the basis of your national ID number, and they can give you a credit score, and on the back of that, they can advance you all this credit. And you lived and worked in a system that worked in this fashion, and you've come to a place in Harare, Zimbabwe, where getting a loan out of a bank is, so how did you adjust, and what do you think we're getting wrong?
It's like a root canal.
Oh, okay. So coming from a system where things worked a certain way, and then coming back to a system where access to finance is a non-starter, it's disheartening. And I think maybe as a young person, let's say you're a young person, you get to your 30s and you want to start a business, but there's so much red tape, bureaucracy, and just it's hard to even get access to said loan. It is disheartening, because I think coming from a place where people live on credit, we can discuss whether that's a good thing or not, but let's say they have access to finance or credit, and they can come out of university and have a well-paying job. Well, I'm not saying this is everyone, but the people I affiliated myself.
Your demographic, your fellow graduates.
Yes, exactly. They can come out of university with an upper middle class salary right off the bat, as in like you're starting at an upper middle class salary, right? And then you have access to finance. You can imagine that person can splurge on the latest, BMW or rent an apartment in Rosebank or etc, and then you come home and then you see things are completely different. I mean, you can't even buy a car, so yes, I think it was a shock.
So those limitations are real.
They are.
And this is what people are actually experiencing. And public transport actually doesn't work.
Oh,
because
yes.
now we've moved into Mshika-shika
yeah.
which is quite different from, even in South Africa. When you look at the commuter omnibus, they're actually proper. Like they're less than 5 years. You count as it's Mshika-shika.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
There's this little, this is my wonder feet, and they're 8 and 10 of you in a little,
in a little car.
which is actually very dangerous. But let's move on. So I want to come to Zim. So I know you didn't work with Oxford Economics or Control Risk, right?
I wish I did.
But I think we want to know your theory and your understanding, or just purely your opinion around this, because they've actually done a study on Zim. So I think they're the only ones now still doing Zim. I know that there used to be quite a number that used to do Zim, rating agencies. The African, what's it called? The African one that used to actually rate Zim 20 years ago, but now it's not rated. But Control Risk and Oxford Economics have actually done something on Zim, and they've rated what. They just really assess the risk. And what they do is they then look at certain African countries, and around about 24, 25 of African countries, and they've placed them as low risk,
high risk,
highest risk, and low reward. Do you buy into that?
So I would have to say that, Control Risks is quite a big consultancy firm, and they put in work, they put in work in terms of whatever they put out there, as well as Oxford Economics, which is based in Western Cape. So
it's a very misleading name. You'd think an operation called Oxford Economics would be based in Oxford.
No, it is, but they have a satellite office in Kenya as well as Cape Town.
Okay.
Yeah, those are just satellite offices covering Africa.
Okay, that makes sense.
So in terms of how I view the study, if you will, I looked at it and I looked at their methodology. It was mainly founded on 2 pillars. So I think it was political risks and then economic risks. And your political risks, you're looking at political stability, international relations, as well as something else. And then your economic risks, credit risks, exchange rate risks, etc. And I think that there is some credence to Zim being a high risk, low reward environment.
Yeah.
And this is assessing on the aggregate, right? I think I remember, I think it was your MPS episode, right? Where you said a statement where you were like, you've learned to say you have to be positive at the individual level, but you understand things are going to fecal matter
Just like this is the moment. Somebody who actually listens to what I say.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I like analyst talk. Yeah, that's also something that I like. So, yes. So yes, you'd say on the aggregate, it is a high risk, low reward environment because I mean, just think about it, right? Again, back to that business owner. You decide to start a business for 1 or 2 reasons. It's either the job market is just terrible, so you just have to start something or get something going, or maybe you have the entrepreneurial bug in you know. But let's say either or, really. You decide, okay, let me start a business. But then you look at all the policy inconsistencies that are there, right? Or actually the adverse policies towards a business person, right? You look at your high policy rates from the central bank. I think prior to the MPS, local currency policy rate was about 130.
130.
I think it had peaked at 200. Oh,
Yeah. It is.
Yeah. So 130% for local currency. And people can argue and say, no, but it was 80% foreign currency, 20% local currency. So who's affected by a 130% policy rate? But then the foreign...
Well, even the US dollar, I mean, if you're paying 17 to 20%, it's still
a lot of
exorbitant.
money. Yeah, and that's the policy rate. Now go into the market and then you see, it goes, it's only up from there. So you get into an environment with high policy rates, right? And then high inflationary environment. People's real incomes are decreasing by the day, So your consumers, your customers can't afford what you're selling or the products or the services you're offering. And then you look at some of those fiscal policies, the taxes and all that stuff. So it's really draining on the business owner. And I'm using the business owner just as an anecdote for pretty much everyone. I'm not saying everyone is one, but I'm just saying. I think
it's important what you're saying, because if you think about it, this is a business owner who's actually in Zim and can recognize this risk. What more, a foreign direct investor, somebody who's assessing Zim compared to all these other 53 African countries, and they want to come here, and the first desktop research that they do is they find control risk, and they think, okay, should I actually go into Zim? And then they go through the report and they realize that these risks are actually real. For example, how many times has Zimbabwe changed its currency?
Definitely.
Kenya is not having that same problem, right? The politics, the debt, sovereign debt, all these issues, they compound the issue, and it just makes it very difficult for foreign investor to actually come to Zim. But there's this argument that whoever is actually in Zim is actually making money.
Oh yeah.
Do you buy that argument? So from a risk-adjusted return, do you think it's worth the risk? Do you think that actually coming to Zim, when you think about it, beyond the desktop research,
right?
If you learn how
well, she came back, she's here, so notwithstanding what her opinion is, there's a Nassim aphorism that I like.
By the way, I'm also
Nassim Taleb says, pay less attention to what people say and much more to what they do. So you as an individual actually were gainfully employed in South Africa, and you chose to move back to Harare. So anyway, I'll let you. I just wanted to put that context out there, ahead of you answering Tinashe's question about, what you think the risk. Are people making money here?
Okay. So I think that, yes, there's a perception out there, right, that everyone is balling in Zim, right? Just look at South Africa, right? Because they use the rand and we use the dollar, right? And we see our friends coming from Zim, they're the spenders because they're coming from a more expensive place. So when they see things that are relatively cheaper, they ball out, know, they buy. And then we're, just sitting there like, oh, okay, ooh, I wonder
the bingers.
The bingers, right? I always had a joke I had with my sister and my friends. I was like, anyone who's coming from Zim, they're coming to our place. They're coming by because we know they'll spend and we'll get some of those trinkets. We'll get some of that.
The crumbs.
Yeah, the crumbs. Yeah. So, but from a risk-adjusted returns point of view, again, on the aggregate, no, right, for any given person, but there's the few who seem to be doing well for themselves and good for them, but yet again, when you're making an argument, do you focus on the majority or do you focus on the minority? You focus on the majority, so yeah, I think...
And this is a question I want to direct to Rufaro, right, and you can come in as well. That it's obvious that these are choppy waters and there are sharks everywhere, and it's a VUCA environment, right? Volatile, ambiguity, complex, and
these
uncertainty. Yeah, but there's a certain personality that actually enjoys this kind of environments. There's
you have to be low in neuroticism.
Well, generally, as an entrepreneur, you just have to be low in neuroticism. But there was a time when South America was going through its hyperinflationary and dictators and military coups, and lots of money was actually made. And I think it's Salma, I forget the business school case study, where these guys became billionaires throughout that period because they actually understood the environment. So while it is true that from a risk-adjusted perspective, Zim it's probably not the place to be, but for certain personalities, maybe it's the place to be. And I want to really focus on personalities. So Ruvara, what do you think? Do you think that there are certain personalities that are made for these environments, and there are certain personalities that just are better placed going to France and being in a stable environment?
Yeah, look, I think you're making a case for the exception and not the rule, right? So, there's people making, outsized returns in South Sudan, in Somalia, in Afghanistan, in Venezuela, so and those economies are dysfunctional and troubled, to put it charitably, right? But there are people who figured it out, and they're doing exceptionally well in these places. But the average person, and I think to me that's the benchmark, because in Zimbabwe we like to talk about how especially with this, what I think anyway is intellectually bankrupt argument about white monopoly capital in South Africa. They say, oh well, at least the Zimbabwean economy is owned by black people, right? And I say, okay, fine, that's an interesting case to make, but look at the guy at the bottom of the food chain, right? You look at your guard, your nurse, in Zimbabwe, post-independence, what was their lot like in 1980? Where are they today, right? What was the lot of a similar human being in South Africa in 1994? Are they doing better today or are they worse? And how many more, for every incredibly successful black entrepreneur in Zimbabwe today, how many more nurses and teachers and guards are there, right? And the same is, so that's the benchmark that I like to focus on. There will always be exceptional human beings who will make a fortune in the world's most difficult environments. And those are, there'll always be interesting anecdotes. The story behind how they're doing it and their personalities will always be interesting. But the average, I think, is much more relevant.
Yeah.
Okay. Your thoughts?
I concur. Though, since you're speaking about personality, since the question was on personality, I think you have to be low on neuroticism, as you said, highly sanguine, right? Since we're dissecting the spectrums, you have to be highly sanguine because you have to be highly optimistic that something is going to work despite the policies changing or whatever's happening or the currency changing, So yes, I think you also have to be somewhat of a cold-blooded mercenary to make it, really. Yeah.
Okay, so my argument is actually it only takes one or two. If you think about it, it only took one Cecil Rhodes to open up the interior of Africa. Yeah. And if he had lived longer than the old, 48 years, he would have accomplished something great. And it only just took one Cecil Rhodes.
You're saying it as if he didn't accomplish something great.
Well, he did, but if he had lived, a little bit longer, he would have achieved a united Africa.
A rail from Cape to Cairo.
Yeah, you would have achieved it. But the point I'm trying to make is it only took one Cecil Rhodes. Perhaps you could add Charles Rudd and a couple, but it was less than 10 people. If you think about America as well, right? And why I'm saying this is because, whether you call them Buccaneers or a certain personality type, is how can Zimbabwe introduce these type of people like Cecil Rhodes, who've got that kind of personality, who've got that very forceful nature and who make things happen, who are extremely open-minded and, have got the personality to go and do things and make things happen. How can we improve for those particular individuals? So not, if I go with Rufara's argument, this is not for everybody, but we're saying those Buccaneers who can really make the change in Zimbabwe. How can Zimbabwe then be suitable for these individuals? What do we need to do? People who've decided that actually they like the adventure.
Oh, they're cowboys.
They're cowboys, exactly. What do we need to do?
I think they'll struggle in a place like Zim because they,
So what do we need to do to improve it for them? So they're cowboys, right? This is the sort of place that they love to play in, but they're just finding it very difficult. So they end up in the DRC, they end up in South Sudan, they end up in Somalia. How do we ensure that they come to Zim and they still get their return, they still get their adrenaline rush, and they still get...
I think your question is somewhat asking, how can we make the environment not breed Buccaneers? What I mean is, if they go to DRC or Sudan, these are also very volatile environments, right? This is also a volatile...
but they're getting a return. So when they're going to the DRC, they don't have policy inconsistency. They're literally getting a return. So they put in $1 and 5 years later, they're getting $2 out. So they're like, it's a very volatile environment. It's very complex, but I quite like the game and I quite like, whatever is happening there. And I can manage whatever it is. But they come to Zim, they put in $1 and they get him back 50 cents.
I don't know that that's true, that, the guys who've got high risk, who've entered this market have all lost money. I just think that one of the reasons why we don't see as much of these entrants as these other places is just because of the sheer size of the opportunity. So when you think about the DRC and the numbers that people talk about when they take risk there, it's huge, right?
The DRC is an $80 billion economy. Kenya is actually bigger, but you have more money going into the DRC. And in terms of resources, Zimbabwe punches way above its weight class. So the resources are there. But why is a Buccaneer choosing to go into the DRC and not Zimbabwe? Okay, that's a thought. Maybe the audience could help us here, and especially in the comment section. But I want to move us to, still on the same theme, and look at the Chinese investors, because we have had Chinese investors coming into Zim. I was making a joke. I think last week Friday we had dinner at I watched this guy's at a Chinese restaurant, and it's quite phenomenal. Just the number.
It wasn't Chinese; it was Thai, but
it was Thai. I can't tell the difference. It was Asian. It was Asian. Okay, the producer is jumping out. What do you want, Araga? Oh, I need to. Oh, I'm saying. Okay. All right. Ladies and gentlemen.
So
okay, you're gonna go ahead.
I just want to mention to the audience that Pilsen is sponsoring the Zimbabwe Open golf tournament from the 9th to 12th of May. So it's a fantastic opportunity for the golf lovers, and golf is, it's been derided a lot as an elitist sport, but a lot of our business and government leadership are avid golfers, and it's a perfect place for the business community to spend some time, network, and enjoy some more golden Pilsner.
And thank you very much, Pilsner. We really appreciate the sponsorship, and you guys watching the show. Please have more and more. I mean, if I was a drinker, I was probably gonna partake in Pilsner. But yeah, let's go back to the original question. So it's around, let's call them Asian investors.
Yeah.
And 20 years ago, we didn't have that many Asian investors, but now we've got quite a bucket full of them, and I think that they're making money, some of them, right? And they quite like the environment, right, and the risk. What could we do to improve the investment environment for Chinese investors? Because an American is not going to come to Zim, clearly, but Asian, they could come to Zim. What could we do? And do we have rating agencies that are targeted at the Asian market, or they see Zim and the rest of the world from the same prism?
Wow. Okay. So what could Zim do to attract more Asian investment? So I think that Asian investment into the African continent in general has increased over the last 20 years, right? So it was like 75 million in 2003 to peak, and then it peaked at around 5 billion in 2021. Decreased since then to about 1.8, so a little bit concerning. But yes, there's been a substantial increase of Chinese investment into the continent itself. How would Zim improve its environment to attract the investors? I think it's mainly that institutional assessment. If we look at the credit ratings model, right?
Okay, yeah.
It's the institutional assessment. So we have to improve our institutions, our governance.
Would you say that the Asians are concerned about? Because they're coming from a similar environment that's got one-party state. China is a one-party state. But if I get you correctly, you're saying the institutions must work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the institutions must work basically so for example, that policy inconsistency. Okay, fine. Let's say you're from any Asian country, China or whatever, and you want to start your investment project, etc. You still have you deal with the fiscal policies, right?
It still affects them.
It still affects them. So I think introducing more friendly policies. So the friendly policies for the investor in the country and the friendly policies for an external investor aren't that much different, really. You're dealing with people at the end of the day here. Obviously, in terms of the input, right, the investment, it'll be higher from outside, but really the fundamentals are the same.
So you're saying an investor that's coming out of China, while China might be a one-party state, they're looking for democracy elsewhere. That's why they're investing more and more of their money in America.
No, it's got nothing to do with democracy.
Okay, so let's get into the discussion.
Okay, I've got a view. I think it's really quite simple. I'll distill it to a debtor-creditor relationship, right? If what every creditor wants is a debtor that pays. Okay. So, people like to make excuses for Zimbabwe, in terms of our capacity to raise money in global markets. And they say, oh, well, you know what, the West doesn't like us. It's a political thing. They've got these sanctions in place. And that's actually not the case, in my opinion. Because if you look at countries like Russia and Iran, the sanctions regimes against those nations are much harsher, are much more constricting than against us. But they are still able to do business on the global stage. They're still able to the extent that they need to unlock it from their friends, you know. Whereas we've also got friends on the global stage, right, who frown on Western sanctions on us, like China, right? And if you think about Zim's national debt at 20 billion, it's a drop in the ocean for the Chinese. The reason why they haven't written us a check for 20 billion is because we haven't demonstrated that we're able and willing to be serious about paying it back, right? That's really the challenge. It's a simple data-creditor ethics where if you borrow money, you have to actually pay it back or be seen to be trying to pay it back. Yeah. Okay. And our challenge as a debtor nation has been we have all these debts that we haven't respected, where we haven't been serious about trying to pay them back. So the politics is one thing, and I'm not discounting it or dismissing it completely, but I'm saying the major thing is the ethics of the debtor-creditor relationship.
So synthetic collateral is very low. Your thoughts?
Yeah. So yes, I think that's what it boils down to, right? Back to the individual person seeking a loan, you need to show your bank or your microfinance institution, you need to show them your income or your character. That character is what you're referring to. So, and future earning prospects, right? So I think that if your income is not that high, can you at least have some high character? You know, like have something, pick a struggle, you know, pick something to go for you, you know. But if that's not working,
we've got natural resources. Maybe that's what we're banking on.
Yeah, but that's another myth, you know. Like so, what is what you know? I can tell you, anybody who's got access to the internet can go online and tell you what the price of an ounce of gold is. Yeah. But if there's an ounce of gold 500 meters below me where I'm sitting right now, what's that worth? Right? Can anybody tell me, you know, what's that worth? Can I go and get a loan or a mortgage or, you know, based on an ounce of gold that isn't proven? Yeah, it's there, like, you know, it exists, right? But, you know, nobody's done any drilling to prove out the resource and confirm that actually beneath this bar is an ounce of gold, right? And nobody's actually done any work to figure out what the cost is to bring it to the surface and refine it and present it as an ounce of gold. Like, what is that worth anything? You know, and these are some of the arguments that we make about Africa in general and Zimbabwe in particular that I just think are intellectually bankrupt, that we're rich, that look, we've got all these resources. No, we don't. Until we prove them out and we operationalize getting them out of the ground at a cost significantly below global commodity market prices, they're not worth anything. Right. We're poor. And I think as long as we plod all through life with this fantasy that we're already rich when we're poor, we're never going to actually...
That's interesting, and you two seem to actually be in agreement, and I'll join the party and agree with you and say, picking up from what Rutendo is saying, if you think about the 3 C's of banking, collateral, well, we don't have that much collateral because it's underground. And character is really what we need to work on. That which we have been given in the past, have we been proficient and actually paid back? And I think that's what we need to improve on. Cash flows, we just don't have the cash flows. Or don't we? Right. Just segueing into the Zim economy, because I want us to just discuss what's actually happening in the Zim economy. Just the big headlines. So the most important one is the drought. We seem not to be engaging in that conversation because it's got economic consequences, and I want us to discuss those economic consequences. We've just heard that we need to import 1 million metric tons of maize, right? What's the impact of that? Because it wasn't in the budget. We hadn't really budgeted for a drought of this magnitude. What do you think is going to happen?
Right. So I think that, according to the MPS, we had we had a current account surplus last year, So maybe that's where the resources will come from. And even then, I looked deeper into the CA surplus, and it mostly came from remittances. And you're just like, right.
It's got nothing to do with the state. Yeah.
It's just Tendai in the UK just sending £100 to his family back home. That's what caused the current account surplus. Or girlfriend, really, So, I'm not necessarily sure where the resources are going to come from. And yes, you're going to need foreign reserves for this matter. There's a tough task in front of them, and I think the president declared a national state of disaster. So this is a big deal.
He's out looking for $2 billion.
$2 billion.
But as we've already established, we have not been good as far as the past has been concerned.
Right.
We haven't paid back our loans.
Yeah.
So this has to be humanitarian aid.
Right.
But beyond that, something that you've already highlighted that I'm very keen on is the foreign reserves, because ideally that's where the foreign reserves should come in. Should come in.
Yeah.
It's actually, guess what? We have 300 million worth of reserves, and what we're going to do is we're going to fund drought purchases and help the people. But it turns out that foreign reserves are going to be backing the local currency.
Exactly. So there's this conundrum, right?
Yeah.
So my thoughts on, I think that there's a tough task. Because as you said, rightfully said, the foreign reserves are backing the currency.
Yeah. So you can't use them.
To import. But hey, there's this crisis that we're dealing with. So as I said, tough task.
How do you solve the conundrum? Big word there from Rutendo.
No, look, I think I don't know who to attribute that saying, not to waste a good crisis. I think a crisis is a fantastic opportunity to introspect, reflect, and do things differently. So I think,
give us a suggestion.
We definitely need to raise $2 billion. In fact, we need to restructure our debt fundamentally, and we need to revisit all the reasons why our friends who have capacity, like the South Africans and the Chinese, haven't written us a check for 5 billion or 10 billion or 20 billion, which is well within their capacity, right? So we've got to ask. I mean, just recently, literally in the last 7 days, we had the Kenyan president officiate at the ZITF. If he was a good friend, the Kenyan government could write us a check for $1 billion in a heartbeat. Yeah.
Sorry to burst your bubble, but they actually need $2 billion
themselves.
So I doubt it. But if you're talking about restructuring debt, that's probably going to happen maybe next year or whenever. But what's going to happen next month?
So I want to push back and make the case that we could actually restructure our debt next month if we were serious. Right? If we actually put out the call and say, listen, guys, the kind of institutions that have the capacity to write the checks that we need, please fly to Harare. Let's have a conversation. What do you need us to do to fix this? It can be done. I don't think it's rocket science.
Just to schedule a meeting with Washington, we'll probably take.
No, I'm not talking about Washington.
That's why a lot of the debt is Paris Club.
Yes, the Paris Club are the, so those are the beneficial creditors, right? I'm just talking about the people who could actually. So maybe I'll touche on Kenya, but for sure the Chinese have the capacity to write us a $20 billion check in a heartbeat, right?
Unless we pay back what we owe them already.
No, but what I'm saying is, so I think the conversation that hasn't happened, that needs to happen, right, is an honest one to say, right, guys, we're in trouble. We have these issues. What do you need us to do? What are the reforms and structurally that we need to execute for you to be amenable to help us out? Okay, that's the conversation that I don't think has happened. And if we have that conversation and they say, listen, guys, if you make these 10 changes, we can write you a check. I don't think it's rocket science.
Rutendo, what do you think?
I do think that debt restructuring does take a while, right? Because now the terms of said restructuring need to be discussed and agreed upon. I mean, is it going to be concessionary lending, non-concessionary, things like that, you know? I don't think that happens overnight. Mm-hmm. So I think what you're asking for is what do we have to do in the short tomorrow instead of maybe over a long time. I think over a long time, yes. I think what you're stating is very true. But now the conundrum we're facing is that of should we use our reserves to fund this?
We don't have reserves. We don't have the capacity to fund it on our own, for sure.
Yeah.
I think...
But what do you do? And I like the word conundrum because it is a conundrum, and maybe the audience doesn't realize this, but this is the conundrum that Treasury and RBZ and those in political office are facing right now. Definitely. They may not say it in the newspapers, but this is what they're facing. Where you look in your vault and you've got gold, and people are starving. And the question is, so what are you going to do? Are you going to defend your ZIG, or are you going to import? Right? And I thought, Ruvaro, this was a good case where you're going to argue for the free market, that open up as much as possible so that individuals who can import on their own can do so. The usage of the US dollar could actually help. That this is a perfect time to actually just dollarize and just allow people to get on with their lives. And you focus more on the extremely vulnerable. Right. So if you do away with ZIG right now, tomorrow, you have 300 million in reserves, and just allow people to just function with the dollar, and then you use that 300 million to actually help the most vulnerable. That would be my solution. Comments to that?
My question is, what would Nassim do?
Yeah, look, I think so. If you look at world history over the last 20, 30, 40 years, I don't think we live in a world in which would sit idly by and watch hundreds of thousands or worse, millions of Zimbabweans starve to death. I mean, if you think about the headache that almost ended the Clinton presidency, in Somalia, they actually witnessed an epic famine and decided that they didn't care about the civil war. They were going to intervene militarily to get aid to people. And I don't think we're quite in the same place that Somalia was in 92, 93. But I think that if we simply said, hey guys, look, this is the scenario. If we say to the world, there are so many hundreds of thousands of people at risk of starving, I think that aid would sort that out. We just need to be open and honest about the nature of the situation.
It's one of those. We actually need to send the SOS
and not have a checklist for everybody who calls wanting to make a donation. You should, like, if you want to send money or aid, there shouldn't be there shouldn't be somebody vetting you to say, well, is there an agenda behind this? It should. I don't think that. So in the context of famine and starvation, I think that, we live, yes, there are lots of things that are wrong in the world and not working, but I think being able to help out people on the brink of starvation is one of the things that modernity has figured out. And I think that if we're open and honest about the dire straits that we're in, the world will come to the party and we'll sort it out.
Okay. All right, and with that again, let's because the producer is now jumping up and down, and we need to wrap up. But before we do that, I want us to talk about you and your colleagues and your generation, and we say this with Mikey as well. A lot of people who actually watch the show are 50 plus. Like, that's usually the audience, and there's a disconnect between what they think of the world and what the young are thinking of the world. Yeah. So maybe you just want to give us, you can speak directly to the camera and just give us an idea.
Oh, you want me to give my pageant speech?
That works as well. But maybe you can just speak to, what are your hopes and aspirations, and what sort of Zimbabwe would you like to see? And those that you left in the diaspora, do you see them coming back? And if you're inside Zimbabwe, what would you like to see? What would you like done?
Okay, so the first point, speaking about the disconnect, these things happen, right? I think when I was in high school in French, we discussed a topic called l'écart de génération, right? The generational gap. So it's a thing, right? If it's put as a theme for someone to speak about it, it's a thing, right? So yes, there's a disconnect between the parents and the children. Happens all the time. I think the parents are like, you're just lazy, you know, you don't work hard enough, you know, and we're like, no, but you had it easier. I mean, you could buy a house with a middle income salary, you know. Where can I get a middle income salary to begin with, right? And then once I get the middle income salary, how am I going to buy the house or even a car or anything else? So the disconnect is there in terms of the perceived effort, in terms of outcomes in life. And then in terms of...
So how do we reconcile that?
How do we reconcile that? I think like Mikey said, I think it's consistent interactions and understanding. An understanding between parents and children. And we understand children are petulant, you know, but I guess that's the responsibility of the parent. I mean, obviously, when the kids are going too far, you can just like, you know, like put your foot down. But sometimes it just takes some empathy. And
participate in the new generation, what they're doing,
yes.
Whatever activity that they're doing.
Yes.
So for Mikey, it was fitness. That's how she connected with her mother.
Okay.
For you, what is it? How do you connect with your
Well,
parents?
it's very easy for me. I don't know about everyone else my age. You know, I already consume financial content, so it's already...
So you watch this old man's show.
Exactly, and I have lots to talk about with, you know, the older generation. So I think that it takes empathy and understanding that children will idealize you, then they'll demonize you, but they'll humanize you at the end, right? So once they get to that adolescent stage, they'll be like, oh no, but you don't understand. And then they get older, we get humbled by life, and then we start to be like, oh, you're onto something. So it takes time, patience, and empathy.
It's interesting, you know, I'm only reconciling with my father, who's long past.
Yeah.
You know, but it's only now because I'm in this situation. I'm like, man, that man was wise. What a wise man.
Yeah, definitely,
you know,
yeah.
That's true. So yeah. Also, very wise words there.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of the views of coming back home versus being out there, I think that the world out there is better, right? It is better. I mean, the systems work, right? The systems function, and that leads to less stress, at least in relative terms. However, I think there's a shift, right? Unfortunately, due to, after the pandemic, you know, the global financial system has been, you know, it has been haywire, quite frankly. I mean, the U.S., I think, hiked its interest rates 11 times since early 2022. That's
true.
2 years.
2 years ago.
2 years, yeah. So you can imagine that the rest of the world is also facing financial constraints, and that has implications for businesses and, as a result, job seekers. You know, I think there was a great resignation 2-3 years ago because, you know, it was an employees market. Now, look, the tide has turned. So those phenomena have those phenomena have impact on the people out there. You know, they are finding it more difficult. Cost of living is higher. So there tends to be some idealization. I mean, in terms of coming back home, but obviously you look at the systems and it tends to be an issue. So, yeah, in terms of my...
What could you do to actually survive Zim? So you come back to Zim, what could you do? What's like the one-on-one survival for dummies who are coming back to...
So,
are you suggesting that the people who are coming back are dummies?
No.
Yeah.
Not at all.
I think that it's the same thing for anyone on the ground, right? Don't rely on looking for a job, right? It's unfortunate. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but it shouldn't be one should probably have a more entrepreneurial spirit. This pioneer, Buccaneer spirit is probably what one needs. And I've noticed people who've come from outside who tend to have that spirit tend to thrive, when they come back. Yeah.
All right. Okay. No, fantastic. Then the other thing I wanted to understand from you is, as a student of economics, especially because 2 generations, when I studied economics, which is
revealing your about
and for me, because I went to the UZ,
yes.
And a lot of it was very socialist. The lecturers were socialist, and I had to figure out capitalism elsewhere in France and in the UK, but certainly not at the UZ because the lecturers.
Well, yeah, you went to HSA, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And because at the UZ they were fundamentally socialist.
Yes.
Right, and that's what they preached. So I'm quite interested and keen on what your experience was at Wits. Oh, by the way, at Wits, Professor Mtulimoy actually taught me in derivatives, and he was
You mean Mtulimoy?
Yeah. And he was an avowed capitalist to the bone. Right. So I'm always very surprised to see him and what he actually believes in now. But anyway, let me hear your views.
Yeah.
What was it like?
I think it's the same, right? I tend to, you've entered the weeds now with me. But if I have to summarize it, I would say that generally, remember you're teaching young people skew socialist, right? Because we're still idealistic about the world,
No, idealistic is the wrong word. Naive.
Yeah, we're idealistic about the world. We think, no, we're going to beat the change, We have that in us, right? And it's good to be optimistic.
It's like all these kids at varsities, at elite universities in the US supporting Hamas.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, we're not going to get into that. We're not going to get into that. But let's forget that. That's what Guevara said. We're not going to get into that. But please just continue.
Okay, yeah, but young people, they skew socialist, right? Naivete, if you will, right? I'll say idealism. But yeah, and then you get a little bit older, and then you start living an actual life, where you have to pay bills. And you have to face the fires as they come. And then you realize, well, I'm not saying this is everyone. Other people.
Half your income goes to government.
Exactly, that's right? And then you're like, and then, actually, you see, so, yes, I think it was similar. Maybe not as direct as maybe during your time. Because I think maybe, I don't think it was as stark, but the tone was there.
So how do you disabuse yourself of it? Because these are people that are lecturing you, and you tend to believe whatever they say.
Right.
How did you disabuse yourself of their socialist notions?
Well, since I'm also a fan of Nassim, I tend to be skeptical.
So social media actually helped. Oh, personality-wise. Oh,
personality.
Okay. You're skeptical.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's not a social media thing. In fact, I'm not on Instagram and Twitter and those other...
Okay, we're going to introduce you to X.
Never. So, yeah, I think it's more of a personality trait. And I think you'll notice, interestingly, that... And I know I just said younger people tend to skew socialist. But interestingly, what's happening nowadays is that the Gen Zs are now, they're going the capitalist route. That's something that I noticed. And it's more the millennials who are still a bit socialist in nature. And then we've seen how things have not worked.
What's changing? That's quite an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah.
That's actually happening. What do you think is changing?
I think it's just a cycle, right? I think we had... they've made observations, right, where they're like, oh, maybe this is not working out. And this even goes beyond just the economics, even society in terms of gender dynamics and things like that. They're changing a bit, whether for better or worse. I won't give my opinion on that, but yeah, I think a lot of things are changing between the millennials and Gen Zs. Gen Zs are very quick-witted.
For example?
No, they're worse. Like, I'm slow.
And there's no bias there whatsoever.
Slow. I am slow. These kids are quick. Yeah, so. Yeah.
So what? And also because we live in an information age, so they can get tons of information from different places. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. That's very encouraging.
Yeah.
And generally, okay, my view of the young people is they're way more fashionable. And Gen Z is particularly more fashionable than everyone else. I've picked it up, and I think part of it is understanding capitalism, understanding choice, understanding freedom, understanding the ability that I can dress however I want, and I can pick up whatever I want, and I can travel the world, and I can, even career choices. I can have as many careers as possible.
Definitely.
And that's only possible through capitalism and not through socialism.
Yeah, definitely, I concur. Yeah.
Okay, so on concurring, we end the show. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This was fantastic. Thank you very much.
Cheers to Pilsner.
Yeah, and Pilsner. Thank you very much, Delta. This is a welcome addition to the bar and to everything around us. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Please, everybody, please, if you are a drinker, please go ahead and buy a Pilsner. You have my thumbs up. 2 thumbs up. Otherwise, have yourself a wonderful evening and a fantastic weekend. Cheers.